Hey, everybody. Welcome to the first of a series of speaker coaching virtual sessions that we are doing ahead of TechXchange. We are blessed to have with us today Paul Cortellesi, and I will introduce him very soon. But I want to welcome all of you first, the speakers of IBM TechXchange Conference 2024. We, through the speaker portal, we have made these sessions available to you, whether you're an IBMer, a business partner, a client speaker. We are delighted that you are taking advantage of this program, and we're really excited because it is the mission of TechXchange to help you raise the bar on all of your skills, not just your technical skills, but your communication skills, your ability to be effective communicators, an important part of being a technologist. And so we are delighted to have Paul with us here today. Paul, go to that next slide, because before we get started, I want also to let you know that it's a good idea in this day and age to get social. And you know about the speaker coaching program, which was made available through the speaker portal. And this recording will be available there when it is probably within about 24 hours. But there's also a social kit available to you there, and we'd love you to use it. This is two examples. You could you download these files and you can create what they call a social tile with your picture on it, your name, and what your session number is, and what you're talking about, and when. And there's another version where you can put your company name in. So you can go either way, however you like it. They're very easy to work with. You just insert the picture, save it, and all the instructions are there for you. So do let the world know through LinkedIn or your favorite social platform how to, where you're going to be and what sessions you're talking at. And that's just part of the fun. The other thing I want to tell you about is that Paul is willing to take questions. He'd like to take them at the end of his session. And the way you do it in this particular setting is you type it into the chat, and I will address them to Paul in just a minute. I mean, when he's done. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you a man that I've been putting on stage for more than 10 years as a FileNet at many of the ECM and the business automation events. I got to know Paul. He has always been someone who is eager to share his wisdom and his knowledge. Many of you may know Paul as a champion. If you are champions or been on the champions call, Paul is a familiar face and a familiar voice. And so we are delighted to have Paul with us here today, live from his goat farm in Western New Jersey. Please welcome to the stage, Paul Cortellesi.
Why, thank you, Mr. Dines, and welcome everyone, please, to the kickoff of the IBM TechXchange Speaker Coaching Program. I want to thank you for dedicating this time to one of the many soft skills that do much to enhance our daily lives, both here in our work lives and, more importantly, in the larger world beyond. Hopefully, by the top of the hour, each of you will have picked up a few ideas around incorporating stories within your presentations. I'll be revisiting this presentation during session number 3670, the first day of TechXchange, and will be spending much of my remaining Las Vegas time in the sandbox at either the Coaching Zone or Libby's Champions Lounge. Folks, I want to let you in on a little secret. The week of TechXchange is my favorite week of the year. And why is that? Why do I consider that week better than Christmas? Why is it better than the week that I spend with my family on vacation at the Jersey Shore? And it is because that is the week that I am surrounded by all of the people who share the same passion as I do for the technologies that are showcased at TechXchange. It is the week where we get to tell the stories that we've accumulated over the prior year. It's the week where we get to hear from our peers about their journeys and their struggles and how they have risen above them and have tackled the problems that have confronted them, and ultimately what they have learned and how they have grown. It is the week that motivates us, because at the Mandalay Bay, we are all pinballs, bouncing around and picking up energy from each other. Our peers are the flippers that are saving us just before we drain. They are the bumpers that bounce us back, and the lights that are blinking, and the dings that are sounding. That is the week where we sleep less than we should, but it is a week where we grow more than many of us would have thought possible. Today, we'll discuss the why behind the power of stories, how you can best sneak them in, and I'll sprinkle the next hour with some of the lessons that I've learned from a lifetime of storytelling. But we'll start at the beginning. Once upon a time, humans have been storytellers for a long time. I downloaded this from the internet, so it has to be true. But humans have been telling stories since the dawn of time. It is one of the many things that separate us from the rest of creation, the idea that we can create stories. Great stories build relationships and make people care. We build stories around the world we live in. Many of those stories attempt to make sense of the world that we live in. And as you can see here, presentations are an essential component of how we share knowledge. But it is important to note that PowerPoint was not available to this presenter. Microsoft didn't come around until a few years later. For many presentations, we can use the rule of threes. In this common method, we introduce the topic by telling the audience what we're going to talk about. Then we tell them what we're going to talk about. And finally, we close by summarizing what we just talked about. This works not just because of its repetitive nature, but it also allows different levels of depth to happen at different points in the presentation. These differences help reinforce the message. And I'll get into the shape of stories later, but many of the best involve a call out or a return to something that happened earlier. But the classic teaching approach is not really inspirational. Sure, it gets the message across, but it doesn't win the hearts and the minds of the audience. I was an accounting major for less than a semester in college. I couldn't ever seem to get the numbers in the right columns, and I think it had more to do with the fact that I wasn't particularly interested in what those numbers represented. As Bob Marley says, numbers, they never end. They just keep getting bigger and bigger, or smaller and smaller. It took a few swings of the bat, but eventually I found a major that stressed not just the numbers, but in ways to represent them. Graphs were central to most of the concepts of economics. And so I was able to continue with that as my college major because the graphs drew a picture and the picture told a story. The answers to the tests were not to be found in formulas or calculations. Rather, they were often found where the slope of the graph changed or where the lines crossed. And that has long mirrored my view in life. I believe that the best stories are in fact where the lines cross, and often where we cross and interact with other humans. The stories are actually where the slope changes, because that is where we've learned how to ease the journey, or perhaps we have made it to the mountaintop and are looking over into the valley below. So let's take a look at some numbers. These are usage statistics for the IBM FileNet system that I support. at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. They show the retrieval stats per hour over the course of a week. This is just a small portion of it. There's an awful lot of rows in this spreadsheet. There is nothing in this list that draws the eye or that I find motivational. And this may be why I did so poorly during my short attempt at being an accounting major in college. Numbers in columns never actually spoke to me in a way that I found meaningful. But if we instead take those numbers and do a little bit of magic to them, we can translate them from a list into a graph. And this graph is much more interesting in that it starts to give us some real sense of how my users interact with my system. We actually called this the heartbeat, and I've done a series of talks on system monitoring that all revolve around understanding the unique heartbeat of your system and using it for predictive analytics that will help both you and your user community. Feel free, shameless plug here, feel free to reach out to me afterwards for more information on this. And I presented at Think, and I think it was 2018, on the heartbeat and automated system monitoring, and I would love to chew your ear during TechXchange. Framing these numbers as a heartbeat made it and the rhythm it exposed something that was easier to understand and convey than a column of numbers. So this graph becomes the starting point, the once upon a time beginning of the story, because what we can actually do is dive deeper into what is meant by the graph, and we can see how the usage patterns change over the course of a day and over the course of a week. And it becomes obvious by looking at this when my system is most active and when my system is less active. Information like this and the story behind it was what was used to shift our schedule outage windows into something that actually benefited our communities in a better sense. This is an example of how to find stories in the world around you, but I'll get into that later. The same holds true when going over the steps of a project plan. Task lists are a critical component of any project management methodology, but they don't inspire. Stories inspire. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people together to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. I can't pronounce this guy's name, but he wrote The Little Prince, one of my favorite books growing up. Highly recommended. It is that unique ability of human languages, and therefore the stories that they create, that has permitted us to motivate so many of us over the centuries in our creation of things that are only capable through the collaboration that language permits. But collaboration needs to have an audience in order to be truly effective. Otherwise, you're singing in the shower or just preaching to the choir. We want to be able to fill the pews with believers. In order to do that, there has to be a bit of pre-presentation marketing. There are numerous approaches to writing a title that stands out, and for our purposes, what we really want is a title that sets expectations and attracts the right audience. I'm not a marketing guy, so I'm only going to briefly touch upon how you get the right people into your presentation. Most marketing is about competition. You're competing against other people. And I would never suggest that that is necessary here within this family of IBM presenters. Whether you're champions or not, we don't compete against each other. We support each other and we grow with each other. But the title and the abstract are important because you want to have the right audience attend. You want to make sure that the people who have invested an hour with you are sitting in the right room for that hour. Because with over 1,000 presentations and nearly 300 labs, there simply aren't enough slots in the day for us to attend all that we wish to attend. So we have to pick and choose. And as speakers, we want to make sure that the right audience is sitting in those seats so that the message and our story has the greatest possible impact. The best way to start that relationship is with an interesting title, an abstract. I think of the title as my one-sentence marketing department. It is the first thing that a potential audience member will see. Usually it is the initial draw. And while eventually you'll be able to fill seats with just the power of your brand, because the audience will wish to attend your presentations because they've attended your prior presentations. In the early stages of your career at the podium, you'll need to entice the audience in, and the first thing that they will see will be your title. An interesting title holds their attention long enough for them to then read the abstract, and it is the abstract that is the overview of what they will gain by investing an hour in listening to you. It is the abstract that is the hook that will bring them into the seats. But first, the title. One approach is to try to stand out from the crowd. Whimsy works wonderfully in very small doses and often hints at a presentation that will be a bit lighthearted. Llama Llama Ding Dong, a guide to large language models. Then there is confrontational. Is Gen AI really better than Google search? I don't know, but I suspect that by attending this session, I would be better prepared to offer an opinion. And of course, there is familiarity. Everything, everywhere at once. The latest cybersecurity strategies. These are all examples of short, catchy titles. Here are some examples that were culled from Barcelona. Harnessing the stars, using Cognos for astrological forecasting, a warning on generative AI. I attended this talk given by Cognos Paul. He was spot on. Hopefully, he will revisit this in Vegas. Using IBM Informix Warehouse Accelerator to process queries up to 1,200 times faster. Art, perhaps the king of Informix, absolutely nailed it here. Implicitly or explicitly defined DB2 objects, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Tom bringing in a bit of Clint Eastwood here with a deeply technical presentation. Meet the future of IBM storage for data and AI, expert insights and roadmaps. Chris tapped into a long-time popular theme for any tech conference, product roadmaps. And master supply chain intelligence in just 90 minutes. What's interesting with these 4 titles is that they include the product name and the takeaway clearly in the title. WYSIWYG. It's just beautiful. All of these titles were designed to drive the proper audience to their presentation. Each used a formula that I call the 4 C's: clear, concise, catchy, and coherent. A clear title tells your audience what your presentation will cover and hints at what they will expect to learn from it. A concise title uses the fewest words possible to convey your message without sacrificing clarity. A catchy title helps draw their attention to the abstract. And being coherent boils down to using words that will make sense to your target audience. I would be remiss if I didn't come up with a single example of a title that could be improved upon. I can't even read this. It's the title of one of our physician clinical researchers that he came up with during a presentation for a grant talk. After going over the presentation, I suggested this as an alternative, and the doctor got the grant. By the way, the same 4 words, clear, concise, catchy, and coherent, will apply to your abstract. But in this case, rather than a single sentence, you have 800 characters. That's 10 IBM punch cards for those of us of a certain age. With 800 characters, we have sufficient space to continue the mission of getting the proper people in the proper seats by answering these important questions. Who is your target audience? At a high level, will your target audience get out of the investment of an hour? Diving a bit deeper, what is the specific challenge you will cover? Always name the product if it is applicable. Folks like to attend presentations for the products that they support. And finally, what is the takeaway? All right, another little shifting of gears. Sometimes we have to go a little bit deeper and we indicate who the session is designed for in a little bit more depth, and we will have to discuss how and what level of training we expect the folks to have. And especially, is this introductory, or is it medium, or is it a more technical and deep presentation? You want to have a pain point. And I'm going to get into pain points a little bit later as well. But all of us have issues that we are trying to resolve. We need to know the outcome. As I said already, the product or products help bring in an audience that is focused on that. And often we'll be interested in presentations that are in the same industry that we support. And of course, what are we going to get out of the end? All right, duration. This is always a sticky question. How long should your story be? Unfortunately, there's 3 different answers. The first, and by far the most common answer, is that it is as long as they give you to tell it. Most of the time when we're doing presentations, for example, at TechXchange, it's a scheduled event, and we're given a certain allotment of time. And while you may think that they give you 60 minutes, that you have in fact 60 minutes, and that's usually not true. You probably only have 45 to 50 minutes, because a few minutes will be lost often in an introduction. And all of the best presentations have a certain conversational tone to them that welcomes questions from the audience. So plan on allocating a few additional minutes so you can take the questions that hopefully an attentive audience will generate. The second duration is often answered by who your audience is. When you are presenting in front of senior leadership, their time is often measured in minutes, not in tens of minutes. So you have to structure your presentation differently. The same is true when you're presenting to small children. Interestingly, both groups have notoriously short attention spans, but for obviously completely different reasons. The third, and the one that I consider the best, but by far the rarest duration that you are offered, is one where the story sets its own duration. It is as long as it needs to be. Each year in May, I pick up a packet of essays that were written by all of the 8th graders in my town. I read each of them and I choose the winner who will be invited to present their essay on Memorial Day in front of all of the gathered township residents. Each year in early April, I speak to those students and introduce them to the Memorial Day observance and the essay contest. And they always ask me the exact same question. How long does the essay have to be? They're looking at this as an assignment rather than as an opportunity. So they want me to tell them what the rubric is. They want to hear that it needs to be 5 paragraphs long, or that it needs to be 1.5 pages in length with an opening and a closing. But I disappoint them, and I tell them that their essay is their story about how service in the community leads to a greater good and the joys of service in a larger context. And so I cannot tell them how long it needs to be. Their story will dictate how long the story needs to be. I've read 1-page essays that were brilliant, and I've had 6-page essays that were so grueling to get through that I had itchy socks at the end. Duration does not correlate with quality. Many of the best stories are, in fact, the tightest. The amount of editing that it takes to reduce a 30-minute story or presentation down to 10 minutes can be most trying. But quite often, the story benefits from that careful look and the trimming of the fat around the edges. And this is often difficult to do alone, but it is one of the many times that collaboration with a second set of eyes or ears can greatly improve the quality of your creativity. Remember that once you get to Las Vegas, Gary, Alexis, and myself will be available in the coaching zone within the sandbox if you wish to bounce your ideas around. We'd be thrilled, honestly thrilled, to spend time with you. All right, enough of the pregame marketing. How can we do things better? Instead of listing out the steps, we can build a story around what we are looking to achieve. In a classic story, we introduce the players, we explain what is troubling them, we journey with them as they try different ways to resolve the issue, we rejoice with them as they succeed, and of course, we get back on with our lives. But we've been transformed by the journey, and we are better for it. Most stories have a shape. There is a wonderful Kurt Vonnegut YouTube video where he discusses the somewhat parabolic arc that most stories take. Kurt does a great job, and it's worth looking it up. I'll go deeper into the shapes of stories during our face-to-face chats in the sandbox at TechXchange, but I use a slightly simplified arc for most of my stories. For me, it's not so much a parabolic curve, but rather a circle. Some have called it the hero's journey, but I think of it as a structure of all of the best stories that we come across. At its most basic, it is the idea that life was normal, and we were living happily in our peaceful lives, and then something happened. There was a boom. It was the pandemic. My car got a flat tire on a dark, rainy, deserted night. Our software vendor just released a new version that requires an update. The potential list is honestly endless. Whatever it was, though, it interfered with the normal, and we got dragged down as the protagonist through the mud and the difficulty and the challenges, and ultimately we surmount those challenges and are then brought back up around. We then end back either where we began, transformed by the journey, or perhaps our circle has gotten a little bit bigger because of that transformation. We had to react to what changed, and it is this transformation that is the most interesting to us as listeners, as participants in the stories, and it bears repeating. To me, the arc starts us on high and then drags us down through the mud and then back around through the struggle back to the normal. In fact, the new normal. But we've been transformed by our journey, and our audience is transformed with us. Perhaps we have grown a bit, so the circle is a little bit bigger by the time we get back to the top. When it comes down to it, that is what all those numbers in the spreadsheets are really all about. Ultimately, humans don't care about numbers or sales figures or even computers. What we care about is the journey. And in particular, we care about how the characters are transformed by the journey. The resolution of the conflict is what offers us comfort. And why is that? It is because by the time we get to the resolution, we really care about the characters. If we don't care about the characters, then the author has failed, and we have put the book down. Or our itchy socks have suggested that we quietly leave the presentation and see if the snack cart has been restocked. I don't know if you folks come across this, but a lot of people, including my family, think that what we do is somewhat mundane. A few weeks ago, when Dave Janess and I were developing this presentation, we had a conversation about a mining company and their problems surrounding data governance. Not the sort of subject that my family welcomes as a supper conversation. He was describing how even in the mundane world of data or document governance, it was the lack of governance and the lack, therefore, of the visibility that allowed this particular company that did underground mining to continue to operate, even though they had a documented safety record that was horrific. Without governance, the company was able to skate just below the radar long enough to have an accident that killed several miners. It should have been avoidable. But the information that would have highlighted the information and the problems was suppressed. Ultimately, what we do with the data in our day jobs impacts lives. It can't be boring. The only thing that is boring about what we do is the way we sometimes present the story that is our day job. Our role in the Speaker Development Series is to make sure your presentations allow you to convey the full excitement you have to those who are most in need. In the case of David's miners, the story was in the data. We just couldn't get to it. And the same is true with the history of the medical record and lots of other unstructured data across many industries. In my case, there is an enormous amount of patient outcome data that is hidden within the unstructured paragraphs, sometimes handwritten paragraphs, of the billion pages of patient history that I store in my IBM FileNet system. But we have a hard time getting to it because the AIs aren't good enough just yet to cognitively handle that data. But sometimes the story is not in the actual data itself, but in the way that the data flows or in the nodes on the network. It is in the rhythm, the heartbeat that the information exhibits. But it wasn't until I started looking at it that I was able to see the story lurking just around the corner. When I'm looking for stories, I often ask myself the standard who, what, where, when, and why questions. Most stories spring from the nouns in our lives, the people, the places, the things, the events of our lives. For example, if we think back to my usage story, the heartbeat of my FileNet system, the people are not just my users, but also the technicians doing the off-hour support. The place is somewhat vague and may or may not play a role in this story. The thing is either the system itself or perhaps the particular upgrade. The event could be that we need to remain current with our software release, or we need to reach a certain service level of agreement regarding uptime. And by the way, when it comes to looking for sources of your stories, it may actually be easier to start not at the beginning, the original normal, but rather to first jot down the boom, the explosion, the challenge. It is often through the lens of that shock that we even realize that there is a story to tell. Oh, and please put your phone down and watch the world going on around you and the people who are participating in that world. There is a lot of great material out there. Once you put your phone down, take your earbuds out and start participating in the lives of other people. The reality is that we have material for stories all around us every hour of every day. We may just not be used to looking for them. I have found a wealth of material for my presentations from my own healthcare experiences. Whether those experiences happened at Sloan Kettering, where I work, or elsewhere, didn't matter. They created an enormous number of opportunities. For example, I did a talk at World of Watson in 2016 on the history of the medical record, and I showed this chart of the interpretation of a CAT scan that Sloan Kettering did of my head. The story went something along the lines that I had written the program to generate these reports in 1996, 20 years earlier, but I had never actually seen the output for a real patient, and it was somewhat alarming to be sitting in the doctor's office and be presented with my own. Especially the line down at the bottom that pointed out that the visualized portion of my brain was unremarkable. And I turned to Dr. Ganley and I said, "Unremarkable? What do you mean?" And he said, no, hold off. Unremarkable is what you want. You want a normal brain in a CAT scan. And I was like, whew, good, excellent. But it was a reminder that we do make a difference in the outcomes of our patients. And I've done the same thing with diagnostic imaging. This is a shot of my left leg. And if you look closely, you can pick out the fracture of my lower fibula. I use this slide to discuss the potential for artificial intelligence to do the initial read of a variety of diagnostic medical imaging. While we may be seeing much hype about the potential of artificial intelligence to help write our emails and guide us towards our purchasing decisions, I truly believe that the real value to humanity will not come from Amazon understanding my purchasing preferences and pre-positioning my usual can of coffee so that when I next order it, it will drop 10 minutes later from a drone. No, the real value to humanity that artificial intelligence will provide will be to be able to look at diagnostic images such as this, or more importantly, pathology blood smears, and will do the first run screening of a variety of blood cancers or other blood illnesses. The value to society, even if the accuracy rate is only 90% of what a human pathologist is capable of, when applied against every blood sample taken across the world, will do wonders to the benefit of all. In reducing the cost of healthcare through early detection and thereby early, less expensive treatments, we will start to see an enormous opportunity. And this was a story that I first told 8 years ago at World of Watson during session 2671. We're getting closer. That picture that used to be worth 1,000 words will soon be generating 10,000. A lot of people think that what we do is boring. Right? Ultimately, what we do is so important and has such an ability to change lives that we have to take that energy that we have, and this is part of what our program is going to do. And how do we do it? How do we get that same excitement that you and the technologies that you support have? One way, first, we have to have an audience. There are lots of theories out there about how you tailor the message to a particular audience that you're working with. One of them suggests that you look at your audience as consisting of one of three buckets: leadership, peers, or the next generation. This broad breakdown can be useful in a variety of ways, as each group is likely interested in a different message, or at least a different spin on the message. Senior leadership, those who are well above our pay grade, are generally looking for a bigger strategic win for themselves or their teams. Do the research to understand their pain points. It will help you build a story to address those. Be sure to come with answers and not just questions or concerns, and expect very deep questions coming out of left field. Peers were for a long time my favorite to present in front of. Most of the conferences I attended or assisted with are in this format, like skilled folks sharing their knowledge. Sometimes it is hard tech. At other times, like today, it is one of the softer skills that play an important part in our growth. Peers often bring the best questions to the discussion, and the best questions usually lead to a discussion as other folks in the audience join in to share their experiences. The back and forth banter is my favorite part of any presentation. Though getting someone to take the risk of asking the first question is sometimes like pulling teeth. One of my tricks is to have a plant in the audience, someone who is primed with that initial question in case there is silence after the final thank you. Once the questions start and folks see how dynamic things have become, we usually run out of time. We get ushered out by the proctors and continue the discussions out in the hall on our way to the next presentation. For the past few years, though, I've found particular joy in presenting and teaching to the generation that is just starting out on their journey. And while I'm not convinced that any one of them actually wish to be Paul Cortellesi, it is clear that they look up to us at the podium and wish to emulate us in a variety of ways. I do a lot of fire safety talks, and I recently became a state certified instructor at the Fire Academy. I call this herding cats. If I'm talking to a group of young Cub Scouts, I have a completely different approach than when I do the same fire safety talk 10 minutes later for their parents. Tailor your message to your audience. This is especially true regarding the wording that you use. Great stories have a fluency to them. They are often written using words at the 4th to 8th grade level. This allows the audience to focus on the message rather than on the complexity of the words. If your technology is heavy with TLAs, 3-letter abbreviations, and by the way, what technology is not, please be sure to explain the ones you use during their first use in your presentation, whether spoken or on a slide. Please don't expect all in the audience to understand all of the jargon. And if there is a specific vocabulary that your audience is comfortable with, be sure to make use of it. In my hospital, we refer to our clients as patients, not customers. Some companies prefer to use team members or cast members rather than employees. Your message will have a greater impact if you have done the research ahead of time and use the verbiage that the audience is expecting to hear. I've been working at the hospital for nearly 3 decades, and for well over the past 4 decades, I've been driving an ambulance. I met my wife through that work. All of my children have been involved in healthcare or in the fire department. So many of my stories have a healthcare bend to them. And this next one is one of my favorites. It is, to me, the perfect example of how a story transforms the access to technology and improves the outcome for not just the users, but also the supporting staff. I've spent an inordinate amount of time over the years working with children, especially in the pediatric ward of my cancer hospital. And one of the things that is most terrifying to children, and by the way, to some adults as well, are CAT scans or MRIs. They are the big round tubes that you have to sit quietly in and not move. And they make noise and they spin, and are especially for children, they can be somewhat terrifying. So much so that over 80% of all children had to be sedated in order for the machine to be able to get an adequate scan. That's just poor patient care all around. It slowed scheduling and was very difficult on the staff that is already heavily stressed by the nature of their day jobs. Instead of a white enameled machine in the middle of a white enameled room, GE came up with a story. They painted the room and the machine like a pirate ship, and they made it child-friendly. What really made this exciting for the patients was that the night before they were to have this procedure, they were given a comic book that talked about the pirate and about the journey that the ship was on and the role that they were going to play the next day in the story. And so when the young patients became characters in the story, and when they arrived the next day for their procedure, they had their comic book with them and perhaps an eye patch or their parrot. And they were ready to participate because they were engaged. And they understood the importance of their role in the story. The result was that the number of patients needing sedation dropped from 80% to around 1%. Rather than have a cold and sterile environment, the win was to wrap the machine and the room in a bit of paint and wrap the user in a bit of a story. And it's easy to think of this as a win for the patient, but don't discount how much easier it made the lives of the clinicians and the technologists who were working with those patients, and how many more patients they could schedule in a single day. While the outcome of the story may be different based on the audience, the power of that story to impact all who participate is sheer magic. When I first started working on FileNet in 1989, it was the first GUI, graphical user interface system, that I had ever programmed on. We no longer use the phrase user interface. We now call it UX, user experience. We are not in the business to create products. Our job actually is to create experiences. I may run afoul of professional presenters when I say this next tip, and I'll certainly end up in the confessional with Monsignor McGillicuddy later in the week. But listen very carefully, because I'm going to whisper a second little secret. The story doesn't need to be true. It just needs to be true enough. If we look back on the fairy tales of our youth and the ones that we continue to tell our children, we see examples of the moral message being strong, even if it's a bit of a stretch when it comes to the literal truth. The three little pigs in their houses of straw, wood, and stone convey an important moral message that has been a family favorite for decades. Yet the actual literal truth of it is probably a bit of a stretch. I've never actually raised three little piggies, but I've cared for sheep and goats and chickens, and we have over a dozen of them right now. I will say, though, piggies are some of the smartest animals out there, and while there may be some truth to the three little pigs story, they don't have opposable thumbs, so it is unlikely that they were actually able to build a home out of bricks. But that doesn't matter. The moral of the story and the message to the youth is still valid, even if we have stretched the literal sense of the truth just a bit in order to make the message more palatable to our audience. The next key factor is credibility. We have an obligation as storytellers to establish credibility. The story has to be credible, and for the story to be credible, you need to be credible. When I let you in earlier on the little secret regarding the literal truth of your story, that does not in any way, shape, or form apply to the literal truth of your credibility. Ultimately, each of us are constantly building our brand. Our credibility is a significant component of how others see us and see the message that we wish to send. It is very difficult to rebuild your credibility once it has been damaged. So be very careful when you are building the backstory supporting your qualifications for any given role. Understate, please, rather than overstate. I use this slide in all of my talks on disaster recovery, partially to establish street cred, but also to illustrate that all of us should prepare for disasters. While my day job is at Sloan Kettering, my night job is with the local fire department, riding Engine 91 as a firefighter EMT. This newspaper shot from last year shows me at a commercial fire. I'm the one in the dashing blue helmet. The building was 120 years old and housed several small businesses, one of which was a hairstylist named Split Ends. As I've said, I'm no marketing genius, but I would have picked a different name for my hair salon. What is interesting from a data perspective is that once the fire was out, the owner of the hairstylist there on the left asked us to go in and retrieve the safe and the computer. She didn't care about anything else. The safe is easy to understand, but her interest in the computer shows how important data is today, even to someone who cuts hair. She wasn't interested in her tools or in the hands-on aspect of her business. The data was more important. And by the way, if she had attended TechXchange and learned about IBM's approach to the cloud, she wouldn't have that problem. Folks, if you take away one thing from your time at the podium, it is this: believe in your mission. Believe in the role that you play supporting that mission. Nothing that any of you will be presenting on at TechXchange is either mundane or boring or a throwaway. Your audience will remember your energy and your sincerity far longer than they will remember any of the technical nuances of your presentation. In order for us to make a difference, someone else has to have a very bad day. I didn't coin that phrase. Teresa Parisi, a search and rescue pilot in the US Navy, did. She realized that she spends all day in the right seat of her helicopter, and the only time she makes a difference in someone else's life is when another pilot ditches their aircraft in the ocean. Only then do all the years of training, the countless hours of snow flight, kick into gear. Only then can she do her job. Only then can she make a difference. The same holds true at my day job at Sloan Kettering. The only way that I and all of my colleagues can make a difference is if someone has had a very bad day, a day that starts with a diagnosis of cancer. It's a lot different than when I was buying Wrangler jeans at my summer job at Sears during my lunch break 40 years ago. Each of you have an incredible opportunity to contribute to your mission. Remember that you already have the hardest part of the journey behind you. Each of you have already raised your hand and taken the risk that being a presenter entails. It means that each of you have recognized the obligation to get up from the anonymity of your seats in the audience and walk that lonely path to the podium. It means that you have accepted that obligation to lead the conversation rather than just listen to it. Don't stop here, and certainly don't stop after TechXchange. Keep that momentum going. And finally, with any story, end on a high note. They all lived happily ever after. Leave the audience happy. Leave the audience hopeful. Leave the audience energized. You'll get far better buy-in. When I talk about cancer, when I talk about medical records, actually, when I do just about any talk about what I do at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I'm not just talking about a technical aspect of what our teams do. I'm not just talking about a cure. I'm really talking about a quality of life. 3 generations of bakers, and the priceless opportunity to spend time with the people you love. And by the way, 2 of the people in this picture have long been patients at my cancer hospital. And finally, this time really finally, to close up, recognize that your stories many times can take on a life of their own. When Gary Larson published this Far Side cartoon in 1982, he never expected that the scientific community would pay the slightest attention, but they did. And now the word thagomizer is the name for the spiky end of the Stegosaurus. Your creativity doesn't just mirror the world around you, it can also influence it. Well, that's all, folks. Please be sure to join me as I attend Gary's captivating session where he will divulge his secrets to conference presentations. It will be Wednesday, August 28th. And also on September 4th, Alexis will further hone your skills with his talks on executive presence. Thank you for attending. And if there's any time left in the 30 seconds, we'll jump to the questions. Dave, take it away.
Paul, thank you. You just took us on a beautiful journey. A lot of folks are applauding, giving you the thumbs up, and thank you so much. Paul is part of our on-site program, our workshop series. He'll be delivering a version of this speech and also in the coaching zone, as he mentioned at the top, and you can go and have a one-on-one session with him. We'll also be joined by Gary and by Glenn Anderson, well known in the Z world as a great speaker coach. I just had one note. If you got excited as I did, with Paul's talk about titles and abstracts, and you have a better one, you can work with your steering committee if you're an IBMer. You can work with an IBMer who may have helped you submit the session. And if all else fails, send a note to the speaker help desk with the number of the session and the new text that you want. And we'll make sure that it gets updated, because I think that's really, really good stuff. So much of it was good stuff, Paul, and we thank you so much. And you brought us in exactly in 60 minutes, which is what we set aside. And not a lot of questions came in because you just took us on a journey, and I think we all sat back and enjoyed it. Do you like it when people reach out to you, Paul? And how can they reach you if they wanted to talk to you directly?
A lot of different ways. I'm on LinkedIn as Paul Cortellesi, my standard name. Reach out to me there. That's probably the easiest, but you can also, there may be ways through the IBM community. And more importantly, look for me, please, at TechXchange. I'm going to be easy to find. I'm going to be running around the entire time. I'll be in the sandbox. And when I say it is my favorite week of the year, it really is. It actually got my wife upset. She saw my text to this and thought that the vacation or Christmas should be my favorite week of the year. So I'm in a little bit of hot water that I have to address. But folks, please, I am looking forward to interacting with all of you during our week in Tech Exchange, and reach out to me ahead of time. There is nothing more important for me than your growth within this program.
Another example of tailoring your message to your audience, I think. So say hi to Deb for me. Thank you. You know, you can reach Paul in the business automation community, the Tech Exchange communities. He is there, and that is yet another way that you can reach out to him. So again, thank you, Paul. Thank you all for spending some time with us, and we're awfully glad you're here, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks when Gary takes the stage and delivers his expertise on your behalf. Thank you all. We'll see you in October. Bye for now.
Take care, folks.